there's still a lot of people that are just absolutely unrealistic, or they're not getting good advice or they don't know where the market is. There's even brokers that don't really know. But generally, those people aren't doing deals. Welcome to the Dirt Podcasts. I'm Miles Solomon. Every week, I share my perspective on commercial real estate and the business of trading dirt. Let's get into it.
Nothing in this podcast is legal, tax, or investment advice. It's for entertainment only, loosely inspired by real estate, and any resemblance to actual people, deals, or outcomes is accidental or aggressively fictionalized. Talk to your attorney, CPA, and advisors before acting on anything you hear.
I got notice that I am going in front of the Highland Park Preservation Neighborhood Council Board at the end of February. I am so excited to submit my plans, although I've already demolished the garage. They are seeking my company to present why I should be allowed to demolish this garage. I assume that they're going to deny the permit, even though it's already happened. But in any case, I look forward to going there, and I assume it's at the Elks Lodge or something. So I'll probably bring my backgammon set and get ready to spend a few hours at the old folks' home talking about why our neighborhood needs ADUs and why a garage built in 1940 is not a historic structure. I can't wait. In other news, shortly after I kind of talked about patience and deal pace on certain deals, the day after that podcast published last week, we went into escrow on the ranch that we've been negotiating for, $625,000 with no contingencies and non-refundable. Pretty exciting. This has been something we've been working on for a long time. It's been a dream of mine since I was young, so I'm pretty excited. It's the first piece of property I've ever bought without an intention of making some money. So the first thing my buddy asked me, well, what's the plan? What's the play? And I was like, there's no play. And he's like, come on, don't bullshit me. What are you going to do? You're going to open a dump, up in the hills where people can drop off their green waste? What's the plan? I'm like, no, there's no play. This is just a ranch. It's a fallout shelter. It's going to be a farming experiment from an absolute city boy. So it should be a disaster, probably, is what I'm building up to. Thankfully, I got loan approval in 2 days from Farmer Mac, which is the cousin to Freddie and Fannie Mac, the government program that's built for rural and ag land acquisition for kind of ranching and farming purposes. So they are going to lend me, 65% of the purchase value. They're going to lend me $408,000, I think it is, and I have to come up with the difference. And then they're going to do their appraisal, and if it's less than that, I have to come up more. If it's more than that, which I doubt, it's possible that I'll have to come up with less. But I'm excited. I'm a bit of a prepper for people who don't know. I wouldn't say I'm a serious prepper because I'm in some forums with serious preppers and they are way more prepared and hardcore. I'm like prepper light. So I think it's important, if you can, obviously a lot of people can't, but if you can, to have kind of a backup plan. I think the likelihood of society collapsing obviously is pretty low. You have to believe in some part of your heart that it may happen to do it. I mean, that's kind of the theme on all these forums. But it doesn't need to be necessarily a full collapse. It could just be a partial collapse. It could be not even that. You could just think of it like having your own self-sufficient way of kind of coping if the world changed dramatically, like COVID or something else. So to that end, I've been acquiring equipment on the yard that I have for the last couple of years. So I've got Bobcat S770, which is like a big skid steer tractor. I've got a mini excavator, a diesel compressor, a couple generators. I've got a huge solar system built into one of these containers with backup batteries. And then I have just about every piece of hand equipment that you could need. I've got a couple trailers. So more than prepping for societal collapse, I'm probably really prepping for the collapse of this lease deal I have, which is contingent on them building an apartment building one day. So these 5-6 acres I have in LA, once they're ready to build their apartment building, they're going to give me notice. They're going to kick me off, and I'm going to have like 6 months to get all my equipment and everything I have. My dogs, I've got a couple security dogs there, Great Pyrenees. I've got a couple goats. I got to get all of that off and to somewhere. So it's been stressing me out since I signed the lease, because there's not many places in central LA that you can put 2 dogs, 2 goats, and like 20 pieces of equipment and 7 shipping containers. So now I've got kind of an off-road for that. And I'm excited to see kind of what we do. I'm planning on raising like maybe 3 or 4 Wagyu cows. I want to get my hands on some Iberico pigs from Spain. There's some breeds out in California that I've been talking to the breeders, see if I could get some pigs, just for step one, just to have like very few animals, but like really good quality. And then, kill like a cow a year, share it with friends and families. I doubt we'll be able to sell any of it, but if we can, we will. And yeah, instead of camping and doing all that, we'll spend our vacations and our holidays up there. And I'm pretty stoked on that. Outside of that, I would say the market overall is something I've been thinking a lot about. And I try not to talk about too much the market in today, because I don't want, sometimes you listen to a podcast that's about news that's current, and you listen to it 2 weeks late or a month late or 2 months late or whatever it is, and it's dated and it's not really relevant. So I made an effort not to be too current on the market, because I don't want to date this podcast from the sense if people are listening to this later on. I don't want to give some stupid market update that is no longer relevant. But I have been thinking about the market a lot, and so I want to talk about that. And I've been thinking about, I guess, specifically this process of the market going down. I've been a broker for just over 6 years now. And for 4 of those 6 years, the market was going up significantly. Like during COVID, it was going up by 50% every 4 or 5 months, which is unbelievable, but that's the market that I knew. And although I've never been a broker in a down market, I did, like a lot of people, live through the Great Recession. I saw what that did to my family and how it changed our lives. And so I've always been very aware that we're on a very tenuous thing here in capitalism, and it's up and it's down, especially in real estate. My dad's in real estate, so I have seen him ride it up and I have seen him fly it down. So I've been aware of it, but being aware of ups and downs is different than being able to give good advice and good brokerage knowledge to our clients on how to navigate it. So I do lean on all the other guys in my office and in our community who, I always ask them, I say, you've been through a down market, what was your experience last time? How did you adapt your business? How did you change? And so I've been thinking about that. And I think generally I have leaned on those people to give me direction on what to expect. And then I've also extrapolated from my own viewing of what's going on and seeing. And I think, the market's been sliding pretty hard for 2.5 years. There was a period that I would describe as like frozen, where it was just everyone was holding their breath, just like at the beginning of COVID. And people are kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. And when people are waiting, you're not doing deals. When people are waiting, nothing's happening. It's just holding. And that moment's gone for sure. I think we called it like the great melting, the great ice melting. Like the market has melted. And at this point, anyone that wants to do a deal is making deals happen. So if you've had a building that's been vacant for a year, or you've been sitting on the sideline waiting to buy, a lot of those people are coming to the market and they're buying, or they're leasing, or they're transacting. So the spread between what we always call the bid and the ask, just like the stock market, has narrowed a lot. And it's narrowed where people are willing to do deals, in terms of there's still a lot of people that are just absolutely unrealistic, or they're not getting good advice, or they don't know where the market is. There's even brokers that don't really know. But generally, those people aren't doing deals. The brokers that are stuck on that, the owners that are stuck on that, they're not doing deals. The guys that think there's going to be blood in the streets and are still waiting, they're not doing deals, because it's not that. And the guys that think land prices are $200 a foot, or building prices are $400 a foot, they're obviously not doing deals either. It's the people who are receptive to advice, who make their own inferences about the market. Those are the guys that are doing deals. So my partner, Jack Klein, brought up an interesting concept, which I've heard before from him, but I thought it would be interesting to talk about, which is this idea of like musical chairs of buildings. California, Los Angeles, there's a lot of headwinds going on. And I want to resist the temptation to say, everything's changing, because in my experience, every time people say there's a paradigm change, or things are, everything different or changing, it ends up being bullshit. So I don't want to say that like now is different than every time before, and it's changing, and the future is bleak and business is dead in California. I don't think any of those things, even though it feels kind of like that, I don't think it's genuinely true, just based on past experience where it's never proved out to be that case. I mean, of course it's possible, but it is discouraging. I was thinking about it, and it's been like probably a year since I've spoken to someone with a really great business who is enthusiastic about their business. Everybody I talk to is, if not negative, and a lot of them are negative, I would say 70% of them are negative, but if not negative, they're just kind of stable. And I've probably spoken to 1,000 business owners, or I would say around there, 1,000 business owners in the last year, on the phone, via email, in person. So I like to think that I have a pretty good sense of how business owners are thinking. When you talk about consumer sentiment, I'm talking about business owner sentiment here in LA. And I think that I have a pretty good sense of what they're feeling. And, it's easy to get sidelined by that. And so going back to what I said before, I don't want to be too negative. I work primarily with landowners, business owners that are operating on land, and then generally B and C warehouses. So if you're not familiar with how warehouses are graded or rated, it's an informal system. I don't think it's, you can see it on CoStar or one of those websites, but I don't know how formal it really is, because it's different in LA. So generally the building rating system is like A, B, and C class buildings. And an A class building would be a brand new 36-foot clear or 42-foot clear ESFR building, meaning it's got the most advanced sprinkler system. So it's a sprinkler system that you can basically rely on for storing almost any type of material. And it also affects the height that you can stack your materials to, yada, yada. So a Class A building will be, very high ceilings, a lot of docks, a proper truck court that you can turn trucks around in, not only a proper truck court and the right quality of docks with load levelers, but also the number of docks that you have for the building. A Class A building is the kind of the most state of the art, most advanced building that you get. B tends to be from generally the 1970s onwards, 1970s to like early 2000s. Also a concrete building generally. At least here, we wouldn't consider really any kind of metal building a Class A building. Then there's, or a Class B building really. Metal is kind of on its own category, unfortunately. So Class B would be kind of 70s to early 2000s, 24-foot clear and below. And then Class C is kind of every other type of building. So those are manufacturing buildings, buildings that were used for garment storage, specialized buildings from the 60s, 50s, and onwards. That's the traditional rating system that I'm familiar with. I'm sure there are other markets with other systems. So when we say Class A, Class B, Class C, that's what we're talking about. In Los Angeles specifically, it's problematic because we would, for slang, we'd call it like a Vernon A or a Commerce A. And what that means is like we don't have, only 3% of the market or of the total square footage is Class A. So we don't really consider like Class A, or it's kind of a category of its own. So given the high cost of land in central LA, it is extremely difficult and unrealistic to replace buildings the way that they do in a lot of places. Not just the cost, but the complexity of getting through permitting. There's a lot of setbacks and rules. California's passed several laws in the last few years that make new building development extremely difficult. I think if you're over 250,000 square feet, you need an EIR, which is an environmental impact report. You need to get a conditional use permit. You need approved truck routes. There's a lot of things that go into it. So all of that lends itself to, we have generally an older stock of buildings, and that's just the way it is. But what I'm seeing in this down market is the demand for, it's a flight to quality, as the Wall Street guys would call it. The demand for those lower quality buildings is much fewer. So an example of that is, again, I was talking to Jack, and we were talking about this concept of musical chairs of buildings, and he's currently negotiating a deal with two tenants that were in basically 450,000 square feet of like, I think 18-foot or 20-foot clear buildings. And those two tenants in separate negotiations are consolidating in a new building that Jack represents the owner of, and they're going to be moving up to 24-foot clear, so what we'd call like a Vernon Class A. And so volumetrically, in terms of the product that they store, they're able to store the same amount of product in less square footage, which makes that other square footage, that the building they left and others like it, it makes those buildings less useful, less likely to be inhabited, because if tenants are reducing their square footage while also maintaining their capacity, that's a flight from a certain quality to another. So the result of that is, I think, a lot of the buildings that I represent and the exposure that I have to the market is limited by what I know. And so you have a lot of Class C buildings, a lot of Class B minus buildings, and we're not seeing like a lot of demand for it. And then I have calls with investors or developers that have Class A plus buildings, brand new construction buildings, and they're saying, while rates are not what they were, they're generally stabilizing in certain areas like the South Bay in Los Angeles, which is the port area around Long Beach, and West Inland Empire. So there's markets where for a certain type of product, there's not a lot of inventory for it. And the difference between supply and demand is, it's evening out. But then even in those markets or in other markets, the Class B, Class C is a world of its own. And it's a completely different So when you talk about real estate, commercial real estate, it's really choppy. Like commercial real estate as a category is pretty much bullshit. There is so many different types of commercial real estate. And I've talked about before how there should be a different license between residential and commercial. And if you wanted to get really pedantic, within commercial, there's multifamily, there's office, there's retail, and those are all highly particular and specific, and they're different, and the markets are completely different. So we don't necessarily need to get the government involved, but from a market expertise, I don't sell office buildings. I don't represent office tenants. I don't work with, it's very rare that I get out of that bubble that I'm in. And so even within that bubble of industrial, I'm in a smaller subsect of generally, it's very rare that I come across a need or an owner that has a Class A. So generally it's Class B, Class C. And I'm not trying to talk my way into a hole here. If you're the owner of a Class A building or listening to this podcast, I'm completely qualified. I would love the opportunity to pitch my business. But speaking to what I see most of and what I know, there's a different world and a different market going on for these buildings. And so when we talk about musical chairs of buildings, I think the concept is there's not a whole lot of new businesses that are running through LA now. Not a whole lot of new businesses that are opening up. The port is getting absolutely hammered by obviously the trade war with China that's still ongoing. And then also we've got, deep sea ports in the Gulf and the Laredo Mexican. They've basically, not to go too far down a tangent, but they've basically reshored most of the American imports to the Mexican land crossing. So Chinese companies now go to Mexico with Chinese products, open up a Chinese-owned warehouse, and truck their shit across the border. And that's how they get around most of the tariffs, most of the trade disputes. And that's a trend that's been going on for years that's accelerated, especially recently. So when you see our Mexican imports, like those are bullshit numbers. That's not Mexican-made inventory. I don't know what the percentage is, but a vast majority of it is Chinese. Whether it's Chinese, it's a little bit like when you see something that says assembled in America. It was all Chinese precursor parts. And they take all the Chinese parts and they bolt them together and we go, okay, made in America, assembled in America. Like, what are we really talking about here? Same kind of concept with the trade going from Mexico. There's manufacturing there for sure, but a lot of what's coming from Mexico now is just straight transloaded from a ship to a shipping container to a warehouse and then across the border. So it's, they're Chinese, 100% Chinese products, 100% assembled in China. There's another argument about obviously the precursors to, made in Mexico products. A lot of those and the precursors they use are made in China and then, assembled in Mexico. But in any case, the point is the strategic importance of LA as a port. And that is the number one driver of the LA economy and the California economy as well. I think it's like 1 in 9 jobs in Los Angeles are from the port or related to the port. So the fact that the port has been getting absolutely hammered for the last few years, it's really impacting business because you don't have nobody that wants to start a new business is going, oh yeah, I'll start it in California. I've heard they've really friendly business environment. I'd love to start a new venture there. Nobody's doing that. The number of new businesses that start here, the number of, it's, of course, it's the opposite. Most businesses are leaving California. So on this alarmist train of thought, part of the idea is you don't have a really positive business environment in California. You have massive trade wars going on within the U.S. itself. That's what I'm referring to when I talk about Laredo, Mexico, Baltimore, Galveston, and Houston. That's a trade war among states because it is a huge deal, the number of items and things that are moving off to other ports instead of coming through LA and Long Beach. So with the lack of organic business here and the trade war going on within the U.S. and the relevance that the Port of LA and Long Beach are losing, the result is a imbalance in supply and demand. And so you have a lot less demand than supply. And we're continuing to slide downhill. And so the musical chairs of buildings is the idea that we're just trading tenants, basically, between different buildings. Ideally, a tenant is moving because they want to upgrade, expand, get a better building. When you talk about flight to quality, that's part of it. But another portion of it is you have owners that aren't willing to make deals or are getting bad advice from brokers. And the result is, well, we're giving our clients better advice and they're dropping their deals. So we're taking your tenants. And so that's kind of the musical chair game. And what I'm thinking about is, as long as the tenant supply is there, even though there's an imbalance, the rates will continue to go down and the number of transactions will continue to basically be stable. But once that tenant demand has been satiated, so that means when the tenants that are leaving their buildings or they're coming off leases, once enough of those have reset to new pricing and that game of musical chairs is so-called end, it's going to be very, very interesting. Because going to the sales side, you're left with a lease rates at 50% of what they were 3 years ago. And it's that dramatic. You have lease rates that are half of what they were in 21 or 22. And so investors are looking at, okay, what's my lease rate? Here's my lease rate. And what's my net cash flow? Okay, I'm willing to buy that at a 6 cap or a 5.5 cap or whatever it is. So the only thing keeping the market up right now in this game is not lease rates, because lease rates are going down. The only reason I talk to investors these days is if a deal is significantly underpriced, there's some opportunity, there's environmental, there's something there. Or if I'm just shooting the shit with, I've got a lot of friends that are in the business, that are developers, that are institutional buyers, whatever it is, we just talk. But the investors have been sitting on the sidelines, more or less, because they can't justify the purchase price of buildings with these current lease rates. Well, you've had enough users in the market that are looking to buy buildings that they've been able to basically sustain pricing so that it doesn't fall off a cliff. It's been more of a ladder or more of a steps. We've been going down gently. To give you an example, I have a building that I've been selling for, 6 months, and it's a 35,000 foot building. We're on the market at 10.25 million. There's a few users in the market for it. Maybe there's 3 users in the market that are willing to buy that building and pay close to that. Once those users are gone, if there's nobody else in the market, then we're looking at investors. And the value goes from 10.25 million to probably 6 million based on lease rates. And the moment that happens, and it's not a guarantee that will happen. I think one of two things could happen. One, which I'm hoping, is the supply and demand will shrink, or not shrink, but will become closer together. And so there won't be an oversupply and an under demand. It'll be just kind of net neutral. And then that should stabilize prices and rates. The other thing that hopefully doesn't happen is the music stops, the tenants have all found their chairs, and it's just the investors sitting around, the sharks. And I love investors, and I'm one, but that's going to be a really bad day for property owners in LA. And it's a serious risk that could happen, because if that happens, prices are going to fall off a cliff. They're not going to be coming down steps. And I don't think anyone can really say what's going to happen. And I don't think it's predictable at this point. But I will say, with this problem of flight to quality and these buildings that are Class C, whatever, they can keep slashing their prices and hopefully drawing some tenants from this game of musical chairs because the rates are so low. Or perhaps it inspires new types of businesses to come up that couldn't previously operate, that didn't make sense. One of my partners, Evan Jurgensen, he's working with tenants that in a much nicer area of town, like the Arts District in Chinatown, but he works with tenants that, take a big warehouse and they make a brewery, or they make, he just did a deal with not tennis, but padel or something, where they're able to justify the new lease rates at much cheaper prices, and it works. So, there's definitely that possibility, and I think that'll be encouraging, it'll be encouraging to put a floor on the dropping of prices. But the other thing that's going to happen is if those people aren't there and you can't get this creative, adaptive reuse, what's going to need to happen is buildings need to be demolished and they need to be rebuilt as, higher and better types of buildings that have demand. And, if that happens, it'll be very interesting to see. I think then you'll see, you can't build new buildings at the cost of construction and the cost to purchase land when lease rates are at $1 gross or less or whatever it is. You can do the math, but it's really challenging. Just even if the land's free, the construction costs alone is really problematic, especially for smaller buildings. If you want to build a 30,000 square foot building and it costs you, I don't know, I think $200 a foot is probably generous. In the sense that it's probably more, but just for example, say you want to build a 30,000 foot building at $220 a foot, that's $6.6 million. So that's just for the building, right? That's assuming the land is free, which it's obviously not. So at $6.6 million, if you want to get a 6% return, you need to get $33,000 a month. That's like $1.05 net. And then your property taxes, obviously it's going to get reassessed. So your property taxes are going to be like 40 cents. So can you get $1.50 gross for a new building? I don't know. That's a really big fucking question mark on that right now. So that's the problem. So it's really coming down to the specific buildings, the areas. Tenants are getting very picky, and it makes sense. They can, right? They're shopping the goodwill, and they're only willing to buy what looks like an amazing deal or something that looks really nice, or is unique. So I think that's kind of, as a market, where we're at right now, and I'm interested to see where it goes. I think it's going to be a great year for doing deals, and I think we're going to sell and lease a lot of properties. But I also hope that I can get in front of more owners and give them, this isn't necessarily a compelling business pitch. It's not all rosy. It's pretty doom and gloom, but the path is there. You can be an advisor to your clients and say, look, this is the reality. I'm not, I realize that it's not the most beautiful picture of the world, but this is what it is. And I can get deals done now versus the guys that are going to be sitting there holding their dicks in 2 years with no tenants, no deals. And I think that's the option that they'll have. So yeah, the next few weeks should be, few months should be interesting. I look forward to where we go.